Hello and welcome back. In this video, I will be speaking about the third underlying concept of kidocratic education, the gift and the philosophy of expenditure. For me, it all started in 1992 when I saw the film Reservoir Dogs and decided to write my master's thesis on it. I was in New York studying filmmaking and media philosophy at the New School. The film was critiqued for its gratuitous violence, especially the scene in which a character called Mr. Blonde slices a cop's ear. But it reminded me of Vincent van Gogh's gift of his ear. It resonated of sacrifice. There was also the eye-slashing scene in The Andalusian Dog, the surrealist film by Dali and Buñuel. But I also remembered a film I had seen as a child called Bedara Kannappa, translates to Hunter I Man, about a Tamil saint who gouged out his eyes to offer as gifts to a stone god. Reservoir Dogs is like the tragedy of Prince Hamlet, both of which end in a bloodbath of the whole cast of characters, including the protagonist himself. Let us compare Hamlet and Mr. Blonde. Hamlet endlessly procrastinates strategic action, which is to kill his uncle, who has killed his father, and then become king himself. A more conventional hero would have done that. Instead, he procrastinates to such a point that the disaster explodes, killing a whole host of characters, including himself. Mr. Blonde, a member of a gang that intends a bloodless bank heist, consciously sabotages the plan, resulting in the death of all the key characters, including himself. Both these narratives point not to the efficacy of strategic action towards desired goals, but rather to the problematization of the desired goals. The kingship for Hamlet and a chunk of money for Mr. Blonde. Both Hamlet and Mr. Blonde are subversive figures, puncturing and sabotaging oppressively productive economies. George Bataille's essay, The Notion of Expenditure, helped me crack the code of Reservoir Dogs. Bataille, a 20th century philosopher who was both Marxist and Nietzschean, based his philosophy of expenditure in pre-Christian and non-Christian cultures, especially the potlatch, as practiced by North American indigenous people, in which the status of a person depended on what he gave rather than what he kept for himself. This was completely opposite of the capitalist economy, which was based on accumulation, hoarding, and production. Like Nietzsche, Bataille blames Christianity for lowering the ceiling on non-productive expenditure that was there in Europe in the pagan cultures. And he blames the bourgeoisie, who replaced the prodigality of the feudal classes with rational spending and accumulation. And the impact of this culture on the indigenous people was devastating. It is a fact that the Canadian federal government banned the potlatch in 1884, calling it reckless, wasteful, and unchristian. The potlatch, as a ritualized form of redistribution of wealth, was replaced by capitalist extraction, production, and accumulation, which has led to our current planetary disaster. In 2012, the movement Idle No More called a halt to endless extraction, production, and consumerism. The rallies, blockades, and round dances derailed the flow of capitalist production and connected all of us participants through the priceless joys of native culture. It was then that I connected production to work and expenditure to play, and wrote the Kidocratic Manifesto that called for a play-centered economy, rejecting consumerism, work, calling for a play-centered economy, which meant art, culture, polymorphous perversity, and non-productive sex. It stated, we will work only as much as is necessary to keep on playing. So what is the gift or the sacrifice we will give nature that has been worked to death? I am inspired by Vedara Kannappa, who offered his eyes to a bleeding stone, who reminds me of Greta, who refuses to fly because of the carbon emissions of the airline industry. Let us sacrifice speed and the aerial view of the planet so that nature can heal. In my next video, I'll be speaking about minoritarianism and base materialism, the fourth concept. They are overlapping concepts of kidocratic education. Till then,